Uh, Thank you all for joining us for this mini-symposium to mark World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought. The aim of World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought, which was established by the UN in 1995, is to raise public awareness on the issues of drought and desertification. Deserts and drylands cover approximately 40% of the Earth's surface and are home to 1/3 of the Earth's population. With human populations rapidly growing and climate change an increasing threat, the importance of researching drought and desertification has only increased. The scope of desertification and drought and their effects on human populations is vast. And we're excited that today's group of speakers comes from a diverse set of disciplines, working on desertification and drought from many different angles. The format of our presentations will be lightning talks. If you've never attended a conference with lightning talks before, the idea is this. Each speaker speaks for about 3 minutes. He or she will present the main ideas or some highlights of his or her research. And the idea is to stimulate a conversation. So we hope that there will be some follow-up afterwards, future collaboration. And following each talk, we'll also take a few minutes for questions. Given that this meeting is happening over Zoom and not in person, we request that you type your questions using the chat box. We think that will help the event run a bit more smoothly. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the day. Yair Mau is a faculty member here at the Hebrew University's Faculty of Agriculture, and he'll be speaking about dryland afforestation with water harvesting.
Hello, thank you. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so I will be speaking about dryland afforestation with water harvesting. So let's start with water harvesting. Here we see a tractor building bunds on a hill slope. And along those bunds, trees are planted. And when rain falls, it can accumulate there. And then the trees can grow with this extra water. On a larger scale, that's how it looks like. We see those parallel lines along the hill slopes. And that's a picture from a forest just north of Beersheba in the Negev Desert in Israel. So the question I am asking now is, can we make afforestation more resilient to climatic variability, specifically to droughts? I am approaching this question through mathematical modeling. We start with a dryland vegetation model, and we can do mathematical analysis and computer simulations with it. And we have two basic patterns that emerge. We see on the bottom right, those this squiggly line represents the land modifications that I showed you before. And those two kind of patterns, they align themselves according to those land modifications. So we have a stripe pattern and a rhombic pattern, which is a sort of an hexagonal pattern, but a little bit stretched. And on this graph, we see biomass against precipitation. So we see that those black lines represent the branches of existence of those two basic patterns. So we have that the rhombic pattern exists more to the left of the graph. That means for lower precipitation values. That is to say that if we have a stripe pattern and we have a reduction in the precipitation, then only the hexagonal pattern, the rhombic pattern, is expected to exist. So the question here is the stripe pattern resilient to droughts? And here we'll see three possible scenarios. The first one is for a weak drought. Under a weak drought, we start with, on the bottom, we see a time lapse. We have a stripe pattern that naturally becomes a rhombic pattern. So the ecosystem survives as a vegetated state, and we call that a success. The second scenario is a much stronger drought. So we see a total collapse of the ecosystem. And that's, of course, not desirable. But that's not the only scenario we find under strong droughts. We can have also that the stripe pattern, after some initial decrease, it can converge to a rhombic scenario. So what is the difference between collapse and survival under a strong drought? So I call your attention to the beginning, to the first panel here. It shows that the first panel is not only a pure stripe pattern, but it is a rhombic pattern. It is a stripe pattern with some patchiness in it. It has some rhombic pattern in it as well. And that allows the system not to collapse, but to go to a vegetated state. So to sum up, the rhombic pattern is more resilient than the stripe pattern. We can manage ecosystems to increase their resilience by introducing some patchiness into the stripe pattern. And of course, the full story is greater than that. And pretty soon it will be available. And that's the end of the talk. Thank you for your attention. And I'd be happy to answer questions. That's all. So I guess that we have a couple minutes here for questions, if there are any.
There's one already.
Okay.
Which desert is behind you?
Oh yeah, that's the great desert of Mars. Beautiful desert. I recommend it. Yeah. Maybe I should stop share. So if there are not further questions, so you are happy, I would be happy to answer further questions if someone wants to contact me later. And I think we could go to the second speaker, Chaim Garfinkel from the Institute of Earth Sciences at the Hebrew University.
Okay, should I? Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, so this is work that's a little different than I think the other talks here. So my background is the atmospheric dynamics and climate dynamics, understanding. And this particular paper was published a couple of months ago, and the goal is to understand intermodal diversity in climate projections. So the motivation for this work is understanding this kind of pattern. So this is historical precipitation in climate models that are used to project the future, and this is the change, the response of precipitation in these models. We see a reduction in this region here. It's about 15, even up to 25% reduction in precipitation in the multi-model mean. And so that's what the multi-model mean projects. However, if you look at individual models, there's a wide range of projections. So this is a figure showing the change in precipitation projected by all the models. There's 42 different models, global climate models that are averaged to give this. And you can take these 42 models and divide them into the models with a stronger drying trend over Israel and a weaker drying trend over Israel. So there are some models where the drying trend over Israel is over 50%. I mean, in multi-model mean, it's about 25%. Some models show, however, 50% drying trend. Other models show no drying trend or very, very weak drying trend over Israel. And if you look at by construction over Israel, these two differ quite dramatically. However, elsewhere in the globe, they're actually pretty similar. In other words, the question is, the motivation for this work is to understand why there's such wide diversity among models, why there's some models that have essentially no drying trend or very weak drying trend over Israel, and other models and over the Mediterranean more generally, and why other models show a very strong drying trend. And yeah, so the projected precipitation reduction ranges, and how do we make sense of that? And that's the overall goal of this work, is to understand the large-scale drivers of drying, and basically how much of this wide diversity in projected drying among the models is due to the diversity in, for example, the amount of global warming among these models, how much is due to changes in, let's say, the Hadley cell, or changes, and how much is due to changes in local factors that maybe these global models may have trouble simulating, and if they simulate, they may differ among them. The simulation of these local processes may differ among the models. And part of it is understanding why the Eastern Mediterranean is such a hot spot for climate change. And in the interest of keeping this to 3 minutes, I cut out almost all the results. I just have one slide with results, just to give you an example. And basically, what we've done is we see the paper in a nutshell. Is we look at 5 different global factors, 5 different factors that may differ among these models that vary on large spatial scales. One of them is Arctic amplification, how much the pole warms more than the tropics. Another one is changes in the stratosphere, changes in the Hadley cell, changes in global average surface temperature, and also changes in the stratification of the tropics. The details are not that important, but it turns out if you take all 5 of these factors, the intermodal diversity of these 5 factors into account, you can then compare the actual change in precipitation simulated by these models and the change in precipitation that would be predicted if you just have these 5 factors here. And it turns out you get a very strong correlation. In other words, at least over Israel, we're the sort of the exception. These 5 factors explain much of the intermodal diversity of correlation, let's say about of 0.7 or so, so about roughly half the variance among the models in the precipitation decrease over Israel can be explained by these 5 large-scale global factors. If you add local factors, then you can get very high correlations. And we're sort of an exception. In most regions, the correlation is actually lower. And just I see a chat. So this is all annual averaged. We've done the exact same analysis for winter time only, and it's pretty similar. Correlations. I mean, pretty much all the results in the paper are fairly similar for winter versus annual averaged. And then this is just. I want to mention. I should say that the models that are sort of out here with a very strong drying trend are not necessarily bad models, and models up here are not necessarily bad models. There's sort of a mix of. I mean, I don't know how familiar with individual models, but the GFDL model is a very good model. And this model shows almost no drying trend over Israel. EC Earth is also a very good model. Again, almost no drying trend over Israel, maybe 10%, and that's it. And some of these other models, MyRock is also a very good model. MPI is also a very good model. These are all good models, but they have a very wide diversity in projection. And it turns out that these factors here can explain most of the, at least over Israel, most of the reduction. Other regions of the globe, it's not really true. The really local factors are more important. So just some conclusions from the paper. I barely discussed, I didn't discuss most of these in this 3 minutes here, but if you're interested, the paper was published a couple months ago, and you're welcome to open it up and send questions. Thank you.
Can I ask something?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Hi, Chaim. It's Tamir Klein from the Weizmann. Thank you for the talk. I noticed in the maps that there will be higher precipitation predicted for Arabia. So
yeah.
Is this something that can, if deviates by a few hundred kilometers, could affect the southern region of Israel, the Negev?
Yeah, I honestly haven't looked at that, but I see what you mean. In other words, you see that there's a poleward shift. This is really the Sahel precipitation reaches higher latitudes, at least in some models. Yeah, I honestly haven't looked at that, so I can't really answer the question intelligently. And I think also these models probably can't really capture. These are all relatively coarse resolution models. So I have a student right now looking at the CMAP6, but even CMAP6 is still coarse resolution. So but. I guess, yeah, it's a good question. I don't have question's better than the answer.
Okay, thanks.
We have one more question, and it's whether you can say anything about the rain season length in contrast to just the total amount of precipitation.
So yeah, I have not looked at rain season length. There are other papers that have, and they find that a reduction in rain season length. I have not personally looked at that. And what I have done is I've looked at annual average versus extended winter season, and the results are pretty similar. But I have not separated by month just to see whether, let's say, in March and April or October, November.
Thank you. I think it's time to go to the next speaker. Thanks, Chaim. Next one is Ron Veit from BGO, the Blaustein Institute for Desert Research. Aaron, you there? I'm not sure. All right, so we might go to the next speaker. Tamir Klein. Tamir Klein from the Weizmann Institute of Science.
Can you see my talk?
Yes.
Just a moment. Okay, so I'll be talking about increasing risk for population exposure to heat in Africa, India, and the Middle East. So I'm studying climate change, but usually what we study in my lab is the effect of drying and warming on trees and forests. But in this project, I will express some other passion I have, which relates to human populations. So even longer than a decade ago, we initiated a series of studies of human population growth and their relationships with climate change here in Israel, for example, the eco-demographic crisis, which we termed back at the time, with many articles that went out in Hebrew. So in this study, which I did together with Bill Underegg from University of Utah in America, we looked how many people will be actually affected by high temperature over summer. So we know the density of population on the planet. Currently, China, India, and Europe are the densest. We also know where the hot and cold places are. This is in the bottom left corner. You can see the temperature map of Earth. And we have good understanding or quite good knowledge of what will be here by the end of the century. So you can see that on the top left corner, temperature will rise quite homogeneously over population centers. It's true that the North Pole will heat more, but this wouldn't affect human populations. But what we also know is that human population will not grow in the same way that they used to grow. So for example, on the bottom left corner, you can see that Africa will grow much more in population than today, India as well, and the Middle East, China to a lesser extent. So what we did in this project, we actually combined the maps of the predicted population and the maps of the predicted temperature for 2090. And this is what we got. So you could see immediately that the already hot places, which are fastly growing in terms of population, are the ones that will suffer most of the effects in terms of exposure to heat. And here you can see places like Nigeria in Africa. You have a red dot over Baghdad and Iraq, Israel as well, Cairo, many parts in India. The top will be New Delhi, and to a lesser extent in China, as I said. So in total, we're talking about additional 3 billion people that will be projected to be exposed to the hottest month's temperature of 36 degrees on average. So it means that they will have much higher temperature days in 2090 compared to 2010. And with that, I'm going to close and open for questions. Thank you for initiating this wonderful day.
Does anybody have a question? If you do, write it in the chat. And I have one, which is, so it seems like the warming that's occurring in these areas is part of a global trend, right? It's nothing specific to these areas. And is there any possible mitigation strategy that you've thought about, or the trends that are happening there? The population side is local, but is there anything that the people living there can do to mitigate this coming issue?
Thank you for the question, Isaac. So as you said, yes, the tragedy of the hottest places being also the most developing in terms of population, like in Israel, for example, and other places. And yes, in the paper, I didn't have time to show here, we looked at different scenarios of population growth, and we saw that some scenarios by which population will not grow as predicted, or will grow to lesser extent, will be much safer for human population. And of course, on the other side, if we mitigate climate change, of course, the effects would be much milder than I showed.
Thanks, Tamir. I think we will go to the next speaker now. Shlomy Vainer from Hebrew University, the Institute of Earth Sciences. Shlomy? All right. I see he's connected.
I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
And I will share my screen. It's okay? Can I start with the question, your questionnaire, Isaac? Because I'm going to talk about the ages of deserts, also in Africa. And then, yeah, so it's not so obvious what is the age of the desert. So I will give an ancient example of a desertification from the Kalahari Desert. And I will try to relate desertification or the infiltration of massive deposits of sand, and then how it changes the landscape, but particularly the diminishing of lakes, and eventually maybe this infiltration of sand will move or cause hominins to migrate out of Africa about 2 million years ago. So I will focus on two examples. One, I think it's quite famous site if some of you are interested in archaeology. The Cradle of Humankind, it's a series of caves in northern Southern Africa. So you can see here Littlefoot, it's kind of a very famous artifact or fossil. And there's a continuous sequence of artifacts between 3.5 and 2 million years ago, and then the sequence stops. So we can ask why this sequence stops, but I will move to another example before. The second example is also from northern Southern Africa in this place. So this is the Wunderwerk cave. And in this cave, actually, there are the earliest remains of use of fire by hominins. And also here, you can see a continuous sequence of artifacts and fossils between 2 and 1 million years ago. And then there is a big hiatus. There's a stop in the artifacts for several hundreds of thousands of years. And we already showed in previous work that at the same time that these caves were occupied, there was a big lake in the southern part of the Kalahari Basin, which outlined with this line here. Then this lake diminished about 1 million years ago, and I'm trying to relate the diminishing of the lakes to migration of hominins and to infiltration of sand. And when you look on another map of the Kalahari, so the one to the left, you can see actually the Kalahari occupies today the largest sentient in the world. So there's all these black lines. And I also marked the two archaeological sites I just mentioned, the Wunderwerk cave and the Cradle of Humankind. This is how the Kalahari sentient look from satellite images. And recently we developed a new method. It's like numerical modeling, but it's data based on dating methods. It allows us to say when sand started to cover the landscape or detached from its bedrock sources. So in the image to the right, you can see ages of when sand started to cover the Kalahari landscape. And then when we link these ages with regional environmental settings or changes, we see that the infiltration of sand actually diminished all these lakes that we see here in this light blue. Because obviously when sand infiltrates the landscape, it will chunk the fluvial systems, it will chunk water bodies. And my last slide shows that the link between, here in the bottom left, the link between lakes and migration of hominins already put out. But here I'm trying to put another trigger, which is the initial trigger for this desertification, is the massive sand deposits. Sand will not allow water, it will make water to infiltrate, and obviously water will be less available, and hominins will have to look for other places, such as in Europe or Asia, and yeah, eventually to move out of Africa the same time periods. So that's it, thank you.
Thank you, Shlomy. Again, if you have questions throughout, write them in the chat, and we'll be happy to pass them on to the speaker, or let us know and you can connect. I have one question, which is this pattern one that's been identified in other deserts, or is it unique to the Kalahari, or is it the first study of its kind?
Yeah, first, not all of the deserts are sandy deserts, right? So the Kalahari is unique because it's all covered with sand. Although not all of it is deserty today, it's tropical or subtropical, but I think it's the first example because most of the early hominins were studied in Eastern Africa, so in the Rift Valley with all the lakes, and it's not really a desert. And the fact is, when you have sand, it's very hard to find remnants and fossils. If you remember the map of the archaeological sites, there are not many of them inside the Kalahari because sand also covers the archaeological artifacts. So most of the remnants are in the caves on the rims of the basin of the Kalahari. So it's hard to link between archaeology and sand because sand covers all you can find. But when you can, so you can try to put out this link, yes.
Thanks, Shlomy. We're going to the next speaker, Avshalom Babad from the Dead Sea and Arava Science Center.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, okay. So my name is Avshalom Babad, and I want to shortly present you about the use of terraces for soil conservation and improving the soil moisture regime. So my study area is the arid environment of southern Israel. However, the concept is relevant for many other arid and semi-arid environments in the world. We can see here some picture from the Negev desert. One of the main problem for desertification is the soil erosion. And here I want to present you the use of terraces. The terraces are a construction built of local stone that was built probably by the farmers hundred and some say thousands of years ago. And here we can see a project that I'm doing with a local farmer near Mitzpe Ramon, and we reconstruct terraces above the line of an ancient one. So what are the benefits of the terraces? So first of all, the terraces are a physical barrier for the runoff water, and by that it reduced the runoff energy. We can see here in some kind of an opposite example how the line of the terraces is broken and the erosion start to occur, and the erosion rate can be very, very fast. The second benefit, it's the terraces can spread the water. The runoff water is spreading on a larger area, and then there is more water can penetrate the soil. And as we can see here in the blue line, we can see the volumetric water content just near restored terraces. And we can see that the water content in the soil is much higher for longer period of time in the restored terraces compared to the broken one. So the humidity regime is must improve. And last major benefit is the accumulation of organic matter. We can see in these pictures accumulation of plants remains and feces that come from upstream. Also, we can see an example of soil accumulation behind the terraces. We can see here the small laminates that represent the floods in the 3 last years. So in the Negev desert and also in other arid environments in the world, there is many terraces, as we can see here, in the main channels, also in the smaller one. And I believe that we can use this kind of ancient method to improve the modern agriculture and also implement some soil conservation techniques. I think that that's all. And If you have any question, you're welcome.
I have two questions. If anybody else has any, then please jump in. The first question, and you can choose if you want to answer both or one of them. What's the cost involved with implementing these techniques, or are there other barriers to resistance from environmental groups that might be preventing the uptake of this? And the second question is, you showed this graph of the broken terrace against the full terrace, and I was wondering, the blue line, the green line in the middle, it seems to be the water content is going up while the other two are going down, and I was wondering if there was a reason for that.
Okay, so I don't know exactly. I will start in the second question about the green line. There is some kind of a disturbance, and I think that it's not quite accurate. But we should look on the larger scale, and we can see that in the blue line, after the flood events, the water content is much higher, and it stay higher for a long period of time, for a few weeks. About this kind of this increasing, I don't exactly, I can't explain it. And about your second question, if I understood, if there is, what's the cost from environmental point of view, from economic point of view? What was your exactly your question?
Either one. Is it financially prohibitive, or are there environmental reasons not to do this?
Okay. So I think from the agriculture point of view, sometimes the farmers don't want to deal with it because the terraces are, I don't know, block the way for to go with the tractor, or to put a line of a pipe. And from the environmental point of view, if you don't take all the rocks from the environment and make her a bear of natural rocks, so I don't see any problem with that. So it's some kind of, I think, it's a win-win situation. It's really improving the soil quality and the humidity regime in the soil, and it's look nice. It's very nice. So it's not some kind. It's look nice in the landscape.
I also have a question.
Yes.
You say it's win-win, but what about the places that water doesn't reach to in the downstream, for example?
Okay, so this is a good point, but we need to understand that in our area, when a flood is occurring, it's very large flood, and there is a huge amount of water. And the small amount of water that I'm taking in the upstream can just, I never seen in a situation that the downstream didn't get any water because of that. The other way, it's just reducing the discharge peak of the floods, and it can prevent from damage downstream. So theoretically, you're right, but because of the huge amount of water when it's flooding, so most of the time everybody wins. Even the farmer that in downstream and he get less water, it's even better situation for him.
Thank you.
Thanks, Avshalom.
Thank you.
Next up, Tao Nguyen from BGU, Ben Gurion, the Blaustein Institutes for Desert Research.
Okay, wait a bit. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, wait. Sorry, I didn't have a lot of experience with this Zoom there. Okay, wait a bit. One second. Okay, where are we now? Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a bit. I. Wait me for a second.
It works.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. So this is my very first 3-minute talk. So I just put it very simple in 4 pictures. It's describe my whole research idea. So the first picture is just about desertification, refers the land degradation in which the fertile land is turning into desert. And by the year 2025, that 2/3 of the world will be suffer the desertify processes, and consequently the world will face economic challenges from this water scarcity. And as I work in my master at BGU, so we do the research at Wadi Mashhad. We have the experimental desert farm, and in that farm, agriculture is only based on collection of the winter flood water, as in the second picture. So in this area, the annual rainfall is very low, just about like 100 millimeter. And once the rain happens for enough of the time, the flash flood will occur, and the flood water will be harvested from the wadi through the dirt channel and later concentrate into the basin, and we grow the plant in that basin. The popular plant for growing that basin are like olive or almond, like some fruit tree, and the tree and the crop is only can planted after the winter flood. But most of the water collected from the runoff harvesting evaporate very quickly from the soil after concentrated to the basin. So therefore, we have an idea of using an intercrop together with the tree to keep more water inside the soil to feed the crop and tree. But the question was, will there be enough water or sunlight for both crop and tree growing together in harmony without any competition or not? So we set up the experiment. We do measure the tree sap flow to quantify how much daily water use and uptake of the olive tree and the crop. And what we grow is like sorghum and wheat. And we also observe the root system to see how the root penetrate through the soil and go to weak depth, and to see how it react to the water stress and after rewatering. We also monitor the soil water content from the time from the flood until the soil is completely dry to understand the recovery process of the olive tree from drought stress in the dry month till the water is added to the soil. And in general, we try to define the relation of the tree and the intercrop. Do they collaborate or completely compete for the share common of the water stored inside the soil? So in 2018, we do grow firstly sorghum in March, but in the fourth picture, you can see it's kind of looking successful growing, but actually in the end, after some months, the olive tree uptake too much water and no water left for the sorghum, so it's failed. After that, we try to grow the wheat, and we see that the wheat is like high tolerant to the drought stress than sorghum, and our research like keep continue to see to maximize the land and water use up in the same basin to see the to see how the interaction between the intercrop and the tree. So in the agriculture point of view, my main research goal is about evaluate the viability in maximizing the land and the water use in the same plot of land using the intercrop system. And you may visit the Mashad farm somehow, and you can see that in that area, like we have already several orchards with olive, almond growing very nicely, and the olive do give high quality olive oil, and also some grain provide food for people and livestock. So I think this kind of technique, agroforestry, can be applied for more area in the world scale to increase the yield of desert dry land through agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Tao, I'm familiar with the farm at Wadi Mashash, and I know that if I know what you're talking about specifically, this setup relies on a big project of diverting the runoff flow, which is very, it requires a lot of investment.
Yes.
Yeah, so somebody who doesn't have the resources to do exactly what is done at Wadi Mashash, anything that you've learned in your results so far that could help somebody that could help desert farming without doing that sort of intervention?
Actually, like what I did for what I got from the result. So if there is like enough water for, like sometimes the flood didn't occur as what we expected, and there was a time there's no flood at all. So we couldn't grow any crop, just only olive tree there suffer. So we do only examine how olive tree respond to the drought stress, just for scientific purpose, not for agriculture purpose. But there's a year like in 2018, after that, like very big flood, so we can start to implement the intercrop system inside the orchard. So somehow it's work, really. Somehow it's work for wheat, not for sorghum. And people can practice that one.
Thank you.
I have another point for Tao.
Yeah.
Thank you for this presentation. You mentioned almond trees. So I don't know if you know, but there is a wild almond species not far from there, the Ramon almond, which is adapted to these conditions. So we have some investigation on this. Perhaps we can collaborate and make something that would even make better results in the future.
Yeah, maybe somehow actually, like most of the time I just only focus on olive, but it's better to study another plant also. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tao.
Yeah, thank you.
Next is Daphna Uni from the Hebrew University, Faculty of Agriculture. We don't hear anything.
Now you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, yes.
Great. Hi everyone, my name is Daphne. I'm a PhD student and I'm working on ecophysiology of acacia trees. Acacia trees are distributed in the most hyper-arid deserts in the world, such as the Sahara Desert, the Namib Desert, the Arabian Desert, and in Israel they are distributed in the Arava and the Negev, and this is the most northern limit of those trees in the world. This is a tree from the Arava, Acacia tortilis, and the atmospheric conditions to this tree wasn't easy, let's say. It was very hot and dry with high radiation. This is the same tree at the same time in a thermal image, and you can see that the temperatures rises from above 40. And the knowledge gap, what we don't know is what is the activity of those trees, how much photosynthesis they are perform in hyper-arid conditions. So in order to do so, to answer this question, we followed and monitored trees for 2 years, 2018, 2019, each month from January to December. And we measured multiple variables, but today we're going to talk about the photosynthesis. So we measured it each month for 2 years during morning, noon, and afternoon. And in this graph, you can see that the peak of photosynthesis occurred during noon, even at the most high temperatures and low precipitation months in the summer. And this is different from other trees that mostly close their stomata and stop being active because they want to prevent harm and damage from the atmospheric radiation and temperatures. So this was pretty surprising for us to see the activity during summer noon. And then we wanted to see what is the photosynthesis when we are rising the light intensities. So we measured different light intensities and how much photosynthesis the trees perform. And we figure out that the peak of photosynthesis, the saturation point of photosynthesis, occurred in a very high light that doesn't even exist on Earth, 3,000 micromole photons per meter square per second. And this is much higher than other trees that reach to the saturation point at lower light intensities. So we hope now to investigate more and to understand more about the mechanism of light harvesting and radiation resistance. It will help us in light of climate change and desertification, I hope. And just a small comment, I love the desert, and I want to say that we don't have to combat, we can also cope, because it's a beautiful landscape with many species of plants and animals. But thank you for listening, and I want to thank my supervisors and my group members.
Thank you. Dr. Talk was really interesting, and wondering if you, I don't know if there's, what the guess is for why the acacia is able to transpire in the middle of the day, and this the rate at which the photosynthesis occurs. Is there something in the biology of the tree, do you think, or is it the difference of the tree's ability to create access to water? Is it brought by aliens to Earth?
Yeah, so we measured also the leaf water potential, which is the proxy for water status. And we found out that there is no water stress, even in noon in summer. The leaf water potential reaches to minus 3.5 megapascals maximum. And other trees, for example, olives or pine, can reach to minus 7, minus 10 megapascals. So water access is definitely one of the mechanisms. They couldn't cope with the temperature without transpiring water, and the transpiration also higher during noon. So they probably reach under the water in the soil, but we don't know, and no one actually knows what is the root depth of acacia trees.
What do you make of this, that the saturation with respect to light is even beyond what we can experience on Earth? It's a surprising fact. How can I digest this piece of information?
I'm trying to digest and to find answers, and we look for a lot of mechanisms. For example, crystals in the leaves that spread the light, and therefore the leaf doesn't get all the sunlight. It gets spread. but we didn't find those crystals in the leaves. And also we measured for now, I don't know how can you digest it, but I hope to be able to tell more in the future.
Thank you.
Yair, you're sitting on the desert on Mars, so be careful, acacia's coming.
Yeah, they can do everything. Thanks, Daphne. Next, and last but not least, Isaac Kramer from the Hebrew University.
I'm going to talk about modeling soil degradation and specifically the influence of different irrigation practices and changing climate conditions on soil degradation. When we think about agricultural production in arid and dryland regions, often the only way for that to occur is through the use of marginal quality lands and low quality water resources. If we don't do this carefully, then we can have the undesired effect of soil degradation. We want our soil to have nice aggregates, allowing for easy movement of water and air through the soil. But if we use irrigation water that is high in salinity, and particularly if that irrigation water has a high SAR, or the relative sodium content, then we can get to a situation where the soil particles are dispersed, the hydraulic conductivity of the soil is degraded, and that can be a major barrier in terms of future agricultural production. These issues are widespread throughout the parts of the world that are dry, and as populations continue to grow, as water becomes more scarce, I think it's really important that we be able to understand how a particular irrigation regime is going to interact with a given soil and a known climate, and what the risk of long-term soil degradation would be. In the models that exist so far for understanding how salinity and sodicity cause soil degradation, we believe that there's a major gap. That is that they treat the processes of degradation and rehabilitation as being entirely reversible. And the experimental evidence that's out there suggests that that's not the case, that there's a good deal of hysteresis in these processes. And by ignoring that, we think that we're missing a good chunk in our ability to properly assess the risk of degradation. Sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. So we've been working on this modeling effort in a few directions over the last recent period. We have a dynamic model that is able to consider how water content, salinity, and sodicity affect hydraulic conductivity, and hydraulic conductivity is a stand-in for soil degradation. Our model is designed to run over long periods of time, and another nice feature of it is that it is capable of handling stochastic simulations. So we can run a lot of different simulations at once and then get a sense of mean values, which we can then use to study the distribution of the values at the end. And from there, we can begin to talk about the risk of soil degradation given a particular set of initial conditions. Now, the plots that you see here, they're an iteration of the model that treats hydraulic conductivity as being reversible. So we have degradation in hydraulic conductivity during the rainy season part of our simulation. And when irrigation water is introduced into the simulation again, the hydraulic conductivity repairs. We don't think that that's actually what's happening again. We think that there's this hysteresis. So to emphasize how much that hysteresis could affect our assessment of degradation, we ran a quick simulation over the course of 20 years, and we imposed a very crude mechanism of understanding irreversible changes in hydraulic conductivity. And you see in the dashed line that the risk of long-term degradations in hydraulic conductivity was very different between the two simulations. So as we move forward, we're working on more robust and complex ways to handle this hysteresis in the degradation and rehabilitation, and look forward to presenting on those findings the next time that we meet. Thank you.
I have a question. Yeah. You showed that you base this research on modeling. How does that relate to what happens on the field?
One second. We think that, you mean the level of degradation that would happen in a field?
Yeah.
In general, we think that the estimations for degradation in modeling, they slightly overestimate the degradations that would happen in field conditions. The soil column experiments that degradation is based upon, they usually tend to show more degradation than would happen in field conditions, but that's not necessarily a bad thing from our perspective, because if the goal is to understand the risk, and if long-term degradation is the potential threat, then it's good to err on the side of being conservative, because if we err on the side of being risky, then we can get to a situation where the soil has just been lost, and repairing a degraded soil is known to be very costly and difficult.
Thank you for the talk, Isaac. I wanted to know, is your study is in the context of the wastewater, treated wastewater in Israel, or is it on general supply?
It's I would say that it's in the context of treated wastewater, in the sense that because much of the agricultural production in Israel is only possible with treated wastewater, then that's one of the motivations for looking at this research. But our model itself is capable of considering water of any quality, whether it be treated wastewater, water that is of even worse quality, or water that is better quality.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask a question, Isaac?
Yeah.
Hi. Hi, everyone. So what is the expected outcome of this degradation of soil? Do you expect it how do you expect it to influence the trees, the produce of the trees?
Once the soil is degraded, there are different types of soil degradation, but if it's degraded in the sense that we're talking about, then it's very damaging to agricultural output or other aspects, natural tree growth, particularly if the top layer of the soil can no longer conduct water and air. Then if water and air cannot get to where the root zone is, then the trees are really under threat, or whatever else is growing there.
Yeah, my question was more about if you know the how damaging it is, like how much of the produce is gonna how in percent, or do you look for it? Do you know how many percent of the produce is going to be lost because of soil degradation, for example?
It's a question that we have put on the long-term horizon, but not one that I can give a good answer to right now.
Okay, thank you.
Unless somebody else has another question, then I think that I will thank everybody for coming. It was nice to see you all through Zoom, and in Daphne's spirit, I hope that we can celebrate deserts for the rest of the day, and we appreciate everybody's participation, and thank you again.
Thank you.